Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Foundry. In the last video I talked a bit about some of the similarities this game has with Factorio and Satisfactory and how it's different and some of the things I quite like about it, and how having a more destructible and configurable landscape, should we say, makes it very, very interesting, and I'm quite fond of it. The first thing I want to talk about today is the different options for power generation in the game, and these are fairly familiar. So over here I've got my original set of burner generators, and these were producing power for the factory way back at the start, and these are nice and easy to produce and so make perfect sort of early game power generation. So for these ones I had a coal mine that was down here in the ground. This one has since run out, but there's a bit of infrastructure that I've not pulled up yet. So as you can probably imagine, down here we had a chunk of coal in the wall over here, and that's been pulled up by these mining drills and then went out onto the belt to be taken up to the surface this way, and then brought along here and was taken straight into these burner generators, and that worked fine for the time when I was using them, and they produced a bit of power. And being just basic burner generators, all they require is that feed of coal or plant matter or something like that, and they'll happily keep producing power. Since the mine down there did eventually run out, I started bringing in the coal by aircraft, but I think that was well after I'd stopped using it for power generation over here. And this, yeah, it works fine. It's not the most efficient method of generating power, but it's the early game one, and it's the one that's nice and simple. And if I had an absolute crisis for power in the future, I could potentially stick in an extra piece of belt down here to bring the coal in back to these burner generators and get them up and running again. But I think I probably wouldn't, because it's a bit inefficient and I'd be better off just going off and fixing it up somewhere else properly. These burner generators produce low voltage power, which means they need to be connected to the foundation system, and that's how you carry power around, or at least it's how you carry the low voltage power around. So all of your buildings need to be hooked up together by this stuff. So for example, if I start digging a hole here, you'll see that that these power generators have this foundation stuff underneath them all the way through, and that connects them up to the power grid and allows them to output power. This is the same for every other building that uses power. So these assembly machines also, they have the blue and yellow foundation underneath them as well. And that, as I say, keeps them powered, keeps them running nicely. And that's the same for all of the buildings. So this foundation then, we have a stripe of it running out over this way to carry the power over to the main part of my factory. It goes all the way over here, and this was an area where I think I had some mining and some smelting going on before, so we've got power coming out over here. Then it's being brought down this foundation all the way along here, and so on into all of the rest of the factory. And that allows me to power the main part of my factory without any serious problems, but it doesn't mean I need to run this foundation out there. And you have a choice of how you want to build this. So I decided, for the sake of aesthetics, I wanted to run my foundation along trenches. So I was digging out trenches like this. Well, actually not quite like this, because I was using the hand drill rather than the mining laser at that stage. But I could build that out, and then there's apparently a hole under the ground here, but never mind. And then I could fill that in with foundation like this. And now there's power being brought all the way to over here. So I can start putting in machinery over here as well. But then you get onto the point where you think, well, I want to put in something larger. I want to put in an assembly machine. And that's a 3x3 space, so I need to dig out quite a lot of foundation for that. Oh, but then there's going to need to be a couple of inserters on either side of it as well, so I'm going to need a bit more space. And at that stage, you end up having to dig out quite a lot of the ground like this. And when I was at that stage in the game, where I was doing it with the drill rather than with the laser and the now upgraded laser, this was rather a slow process and was a little bit frustrating, and I do feel like there were some of my earlier streams where I spent a lot of time just digging holes rather than actually building, and I think that made the game a bit less interesting, both for me playing it and also for my viewers watching it as well. But once you've got a setup like this, you can then place down a row of assembly machines like so, line them up along here, and you know these are all going to be fully powered because they've got foundation underneath them completely. Now if you have one on the end here that doesn't have foundation underneath all of it, then you'll get an error message on the screen like this saying it's missing building foundation. All of these ones are fine and they're ready to be configured. Or if I come over here and then pull up one of these pieces of foundation, so I've broken the connection, you can then see that all of these have no power, and this one still has missing building foundation. So you do need to make sure they're all hooked up to the power systems. And the same is true for the inserters as well. So I've put a couple of these in here and then put a belt underneath them like that. You can see this one has no power and this one has no foundation. So they'll give you helpful error messages to tell you why there are problems. But it is quite annoying when you come in and you build something up like this and then you go, oh wait, I missed a bit and I'm going to have to go in and then dig that out and then carefully add in a piece of foundation. So it's something to be aware of, something to try and remember, but it's not the end of the world when you forget. It's just a little bit, it's just one extra thing you have to remember to do. And this means you have a bit of a choice. You can either run the foundation along in a trench like this, like I've been doing, because I wanted to keep the landscape at least a little bit tidy. You could potentially, if you want to do a long run like this, you could dig it down into a deeper trench and then put soil back over the top of it to make it look sort of seamless as it runs along. Or you could just decide, I don't actually care about the aesthetics of my factory, I'm going to run my foundation along higher up like this, and then potentially build everything up on top of foundation. So I could then put my foundation in like that, and then build on top of it here. And this will be slightly easier because you don't have to worry about digging out first, but I think it looks slightly worse having it up on top of these very, very blocky looking foundation blocks. So I'm quite happy that I decided to dig it in and have the foundation sort of coming up to ground level. Now potentially if I played in a slightly more aesthetic way and actually built buildings rather than just scattering my machines across the landscape like some kind of Factorio player, then maybe then at that point having buildings with foundation inside as their floor would look quite good and quite appropriate. But I haven't really done that, so it's not a thing I've been playing with, and therefore I don't really intend to start at this point. And it's something that will be quite time consuming, and so as a streamer I don't want to spend large amounts of time on stream fiddling around with things that aren't sort of logical and interesting and building up the factory. The other problem with trying to keep your foundation embedded in the ground is when you get sort of natural hills and undulations in the ground. So coming across from here, my sort of starting area, the ground drops and then it dropped again. And so that meant that each time this happened, I had to think about what I wanted to do. So over here, I decided that yes, I'm going to follow the lay of the land and keep my foundation moving down and staying at ground level. But then when it's not just foundation running to carry power, you've also got machinery set up as well. You then need to think about what you want to do when the landscape changes in an area where you're trying to build. And so over here, I do actually have some machines that are on foundation that's sticking up out of the ground because I wanted to have them all running on the same level of belt here. I wasn't ready to then drop down a level. And so I just carried on building at this height. Now perhaps what I should have done is then come along here with some soil and fill in these gaps and do a little bit of terraforming. So I've said that if I do that, then I can sort of say, well, at this point the hill didn't go down, the hill actually goes down over here, not over there. And so this is all just part of the same hill that we're building on. And then I can go along and fill in all these gaps and then I can make it all look a little bit more deliberate. If I really wanted to, I could probably bury them further in the ground as well. I could have the ground come up even higher, but that seems like it's going a little bit too far. Interestingly, as we progress on through the construction of my factory, you can sort of see me losing patience with the terraforming and trying to keep things looking quite so neat and tidy. So along here we've moved a bit further down the factory, so this was all built up a bit later, and you can see quite a lot of ground down here where I've actually built up above it because the ground has dropped down a bit. And along here, even though the ground is dropping away, I've still kept the foundation at the same level. I followed it a little bit along here, but then as I got a bit further along, there were quite a lot of mountains and hills in this area, which I've destroyed in one way or another, as you can kind of tell by looking around over here, and that's been quite satisfying, I will admit, but also it's meant that the construction's then been a lot easier, where I've just gone down to having, well, I'm going to have this flat area. This is going to be my ground level, and I'm going to enforce it by just going in and building it myself. And then I'm going to have my bus running along at this sort of level, and then all of the construction happening on foundation one block up. And so, yes, I've sort of moved away from trying to stick with the shape of the ground at this point a little bit, because with the larger constructions, I was spending too much time trying to be nice to the ground and not enough time building things. And so the ground lost out at this point. But anyway, I was talking about power, so let's get back to power once again, because that's kind of important and one of the big things you need in any sort of factory game, and there's been a few different changes to it, and there's a few extra levels. So the second stage, after producing the low voltage power over in the middle of my factory with those burner generators, was way over here. So I've moved from this area to all the way over here. Over here I'm doing steam power, and the reason I'm doing steam power here is because this area has both water and coal available in significant quantities. And so that's allowed me to bring a belt of coal up from the mine, which is underground. We can drop down. I've put in sort of some obvious buildings that don't quite fit in, so that I can tell where my entrances and where my exits are. So I can drop down here with a little bit of bumpy head. This coal patch is quite a long way underground, but that's not a problem. And so here I've got, yes, here's a nice big healthy coal patch, although quite a lot of it is gone at this stage. And I've got the bots flying out, grabbing the coal up, putting it onto the belts. And then that can go up this belt here, up to the surface. Can I go up here? Let's find out. Yes, I can. So that comes up to the surface, and then is pumped along here, where it goes into all of these boilers. The boilers take in coal from there, and also a supply of water from here, that's being pulled out of the river. Lovely. And they turn that into steam, and then that uses probably one of the first properly big machines that we've got in this game, and that's these turbines. And they take in, as you'd expect, they take in the steam and they turn it into electricity. But unlike the burner generators, they turn it into high voltage electricity, which means you need to connect them up with these fat cables to the pylons, and then the cables from the pylons can then run all the way back over to the mainland over that way and go back over to the factory. And that works quite nicely. It transports the power around as you'd expect, but you do need to convert it from high voltage to low voltage wherever you need to use it. And you do that with these transformers. There are two types of transformers, the small ones and the big ones. I've so far only used the small ones, but maybe I'll work onto the big ones at some point in the future. But these take a connection to the high voltage grid, and then they can output up to 5 megawatts onto the low voltage grid, and that's through the foundation. And that's required here because over on the other side I have these inserters, or loaders rather, which are taking the coal and putting it into the boilers, and they run off low voltage. And also my mining drills way down underground run off low voltage as well. So you can't just hook up your steam turbines and have them work everything. You also then need to drop the power voltage down to be able to power all the machinery around here. And I've also got an emergency burner generator here to kickstart things if problems happen. So if we run out of power over here, I could in an emergency come over and chuck some coal or some wood or any sort of burnable stuff into this generator, and then that would produce enough power to kickstart the mining drills underground, get some coal out, and then also get these inserters running and start the boilers running. So it's there in case of an emergency kickstart because something silly happens and we run out of power. I don't think that's actually happened yet, but it's nice to have it just in case of one of those emergencies. An additional note is if this does kick in, you don't have the Factorio problem where you turn a small part of your power generation back on again to get your coal mines up and running or whatever you're producing to generate power at that point, and it doesn't really work because then you've got about 2 turbines or 2 steam engines trying to power your entire factory. In Foundry, these transformers are one-way systems. These will only take power from the high voltage network and put it into the low voltage network. And so that means that you're never going to have this burner generator over here kick in and try to supply the entire factory with power through the high voltage network. And that's actually really quite handy. Fortunately, all of the advanced power production machines, so everything except the burner inserters, all run on the high voltage network, so there's never any sort of problems of trying to balance the power and have it in the right place. It's always all on the high voltage network and just goes to wherever you want. I did mention that these things can only produce 5 megawatts each, and that is sometimes a problem. There are a few places over in the main factory where I've got multiple transformers together, so I've got 4, 6, maybe even 8 of them to increase the amount of power that can be dumped out into the low voltage network. There doesn't seem to be any limitation on how far power can flow or how much you can put into the low voltage network, how much power you can push through a single piece of foundation. But then I guess they are functionally a piece of cable that is a meter by a meter, so you'd hope you'd be able to chuck quite a lot of power through that before it starts to be a problem. Next up next up in the order I discovered them and started using them, from the boilers and turbines steam power system we've got set up here, is the geothermal power. And that's an interesting one because that requires a little bit of preparation and some specialist positioning. So the first thing you need to do is make this special water with coal in it for some reason. And that's done by bringing coal up this is coming up from the same coal mine, and then crushing it in these crushers to produce coal powder, these little frisbee things, and then that's put into one of these machines, which will combine that with water to make some coaly water, or ignium enriched water as the game calls it. That I've then run along a very, very long pipe over here, which is a little bit twisted, but never mind. And then that's coming over to this elevator over here because I want to be able to get myself down there as well, and then disappears it down a hole into the depths of the ground. And if I call for the lift here, it's going to take a little while to arrive because it comes up from a very, very long way away. So let's skip forward to when I get to the bottom of it because I'm going all the way down to the bedrock. And about 120 meters down, this pipe drops down to the ground, down to this level, and then comes out here, and we see it going off in a couple of different directions. Much like the latest version of Factorio, if you want to run pipes more than a certain distance, you need to then put pumps on them to keep the pressure up and keep the fluid flowing. And you can see here that I've put in a couple of pumps on this pipe because we got to the limit of distance on it. And these pumps are low voltage machines, which means every time you put a pump down, if you're doing really long pipe and power transfers like I'm doing here, it means you need to put in a transformer and then hook up the pump to it like this. Alternatively, you could run foundation all the way along with your pipe as well, but stone is cheaper and nothing at all is even cheaper, and so I think it's probably better to just drop one of these things in every so often. And then you can run these pipes off down through the underground area where we've got all this lovely lava, which shows how warm it is down here. And there are some special geothermal vents down here, which you can slap a geothermal boiler onto, which takes the heat from the geothermal vent and uses the coaly water to then produce steam, which again you can put into a turbine. And these are exactly the same sort of turbines we were using for the normal coal-fired system. They're just having the steam generated by a different boiler. And these are infinite systems. There's no limit to how much heat you can get out of the geothermal. However, you will eventually run out of coal to put into the coaly water. So they're not quite infinite, but I believe it'll make the coal patch last a lot longer than if I was actually generating it by burning the coal directly. So these are working well, and they're producing quite a lot of power down here. That's great. The slightly tricky part of the geothermal systems is you need to find geothermal vents, and those are these little yellow squares on the map here. And so I've got some here. I found another set of them over here, so that's another 3. And each set of 3 geothermal vents is able to power, I believe, 6 turbines. So it's a 1 to 2. But they're fairly rare and quite widely spaced. There are some that are right underneath my factory here, but I think these ones ended up falling so close to some of the bedrock that I wasn't able to put them in because I can't mine through this stuff yet. So I wasn't able to place those. So this one over here is a wasted geothermal vent. And because of needing to run the power and the pipes and so on to all of these places, you kind of want to find one that has a good supply of coal and a good supply of water nearby. So for example here, there's coal over here and there's water reasonably nearby, but there's no geothermal vents. Here we've got a geothermal vent right next to some water, but there's no coal. Now potentially I could bring the coal in by aircraft and drop it off there and generate it that way, and maybe that's what I should be doing. And I should just be finding geothermal vents that are decently close to water and then bringing the coal into them that way. There's a couple more over here. They're fairly close to a coal patch, so this might be quite a good one if there's water anywhere nearby. And there does seem to be a river running along here on the edge of the area that I've explored, so I expect there's going to be some water there. This could be a good place to go when I want some more power. But setting up these geothermal power plants is a little bit of a faff, because you have to do the whole running all the way down to the underground level and then building up all of this sort of systems. So they're not ideal, but they do work, and they feel a little bit more sustainable than just burning the coal for power in the old-fashioned way. The final type of power generation, or at least the final one that I'm aware of, it's possible there's something I haven't discovered yet, is solar power, and that's fairly standard. You'll have seen this in plenty of other games. You build up some solar panels, they produce electricity during the day, you then store that in batteries so you can keep your factory running overnight. Fine, and this works quite nicely. This is fairly easy to set up once you've got your factory up to the point where you can build batteries and solar panels in large quantities, because they require some fairly advanced components to make them. And these work really well. They generate a decent amount of power. I think currently I've got about half of my power for my factory being produced from this carpet of solar panels and about half being produced from my steam engines. So you get an idea of roughly the sort of scale you need to build on. But once you've built these, they are then completely hands-off. You're never going to have to come out and build more coal mines. You're never going to have to come out and refuel them in any way, shape or form. So these are just really easy and really great. And I think I'm going to expand this further in future sessions. You can see where I ran out of solar panels at this point. But I think I can just carry on expanding this as far out as I need to, and we'll get loads and loads of power out here. For thematic purposes, I've also put the solar panels out in the desert area, because this biome feels like there's going to be a lot more power available here for some reason. There's also a couple of different ways of carrying the power around. You'll see over here I've got small pylons and large pylons. They are functionally pretty much the same, except the large pylons can be put a lot further apart, so you don't need to put as many of them in. But they're also awkwardly tall, which means sometimes you can put in a tall pylon and then not be able to connect it to a building you put right next to it because the small building doesn't support a long enough cable to go all the way to the tall pylon, which is a little bit silly, but never mind. I guess it's to encourage you to use the big pylons for the long distance cable runs and then the small ones for shorter distance ones. You might notice that over here I've gone across this river with small pylons and then gone back to gone to a big one on the other side. That's not for any sort of sensible reason. It's just because when I was building out this part, I hadn't researched the large pylons yet, so these were the best I had. But the large pylons have been very useful for going out to some of my more distant areas. Like I've got a coal mine over here, for example, and my Telexium mine up here, and then somewhere off to the south down here I built a new copper mine. And so for these sort of really long distances, I've used the large pylons. And it has occurred to me, although not until after I built all of this, that it would have been far more sensible to not bother with the long pylons and just put in new solar installations in each of these areas and have them all be a bit more self-sufficient. I'll probably do that with the next expansion I do, as long as it's not actually core power generation, because it's a bit silly to have run long pylon runs when you might as well just drop in some extra solar. One thing I don't like about the game and the method of laying the pylons down is it doesn't have any sort of click and drag functionality like Factorio does. So you sort of have to guess how far you're going to be able to take a pylon and then go back and then try and get it in the right place like that. Then you can go on and do the next one and think, well, okay, where's what's going to be the limit of its length. Oh, it's here, and then come back a little bit, and then go, okay, that's as far as I can run it, and so on. So it's a little bit fiddly having to do it that way. So there's no click and drag and have it automatically put the pylons at their maximum distance. And also that I haven't found an easy way to place them in a straight line with them in do a sort of a direct north-south or east-west pylon run. It's all a little bit vague. They don't seem to line up very well. However, I do know the devs have been putting some effort in recently. They've been taking some feedback on board. So one of the things they've introduced recently is the ability to have taut power cables, which I've turned on at the moment for unrelated reasons. So you'll notice that this one is dead straight between the two pylons. But if I fly over to here, this one has some sort of natural sag in it because of the weight of the cable, I guess. And that looks a lot more realistic and is generally nicer. However, when you're using the wall-mounted power poles, you're often trying to run these things down a tunnel. And at that point, you do want the cables to be dead straight, because otherwise you might run into the sides of the tunnel if it sort of sags down in the middle. And that's an issue I have seen, and it looks a bit weird and it's not very nice. So I try to, which is why I've currently got straight cables turned on. But I can turn it off again at the press of a button. Then you can see, there you go, that cable is now sagging down, and if I had a 1x1 hole I was trying to run this through, that would sag through the floor, which would cause problems, whereas a straight one wouldn't. Now, the game has gone for 3 levels of clipping. You can have genuinely not clipping, that's fine, nothing goes through anything. You can have yellow level of clipping, where you've got a cable running through something and therefore you're not allowed to put it there. Or for something a bit larger, something where it actually cares, you can have a red level of clipping, which means you're just absolutely not allowed to put it there. I can't place this structure here because it's blocked by terrain. But a cable, it doesn't care so much about clipping, just to make things a little bit easier and to sort of help with sanity when trying to do cable runs. So cables can actually go through stuff, which is quite nice. But it does give you a warning. So if you're the sort of person who cares about that kind of thing, you can go in and tidy it up or make your cable run go a slightly different way. I have mostly cared about this, and I've been trying to be fairly neat with them. But there have been a few places where it's just been a little bit unreasonable. I think at some point in the future it's quite likely that nuclear power will appear in the tech tree. It's not there at the moment, as you can see. I've got fairly close to having researched everything, and there's no nuclear power in there. But, you know, the game is early access, as it says on that nice handy stripe up there in the top corner, and so new things are being added all the time. I talked about the trains in the last video. The nuclear power will be the thing I'll get sort of a little bit excited about in this one. But that said, unless power consumption for machines goes up drastically in a future update, I don't think it's going to be necessary really to go any bigger than solar. This solar patch is producing, as I said, more than half the power my factory needs, and it's not that big, so it'd be quite easy to double this and provide all of the power the factory could need. And so I don't think I would need a nuclear power plant to generate even more power. It just wouldn't be necessary. But potentially you could have a building in the later game that almost requires you to go out and do nuclear power because it uses hundreds of megawatts or something like that. I don't know if such a thing is going to exist, but it would be quite a nice synergy within nuclear plants to try and basically make you have to make nuclear power. There was one machine I did find which made me have to rethink my power generation systems at the time because of the sheer amount of power it used, and that was this radio tower, which uses a massive 10 megawatts, and at the time when I built it, that was a lot of power. Currently, actually, my entire factory uses about 70, so this is using a significant portion of the power that is generated by the entire factory. Each steam turbine only produces 3.6 megawatts, so you can see this radio tower alone is using 3 steam turbines, or almost 20 solar panels worth of power. That is rather excessive. Maybe I should disconnect it, and that would make my power consumption levels a lot more sensible. But it does have some uses, which we'll talk about in the next video, I think. In order to allow you to keep track of what all of your buildings are using, we have the grid stats option here. We can open that up, and that gives me this rather difficult to read and rather overloaded power grid information screen. And yeah, sure, we can zoom out and then it becomes equally unreadable for a slightly different reason. Or I can zoom back in again. And then look at the top here, we have everything that's running on the high voltage grid. So we've got the power sources. At the moment we have 100 solar panels and 21 steam turbines, and those between them are producing a lot of power. They're producing more power than we need, and it looks like it's nice enough to prioritise the solar panels and then just use the steam turbines to top up any extra power that's required. So as you can see at the moment, we're using about 70 megawatts. I've also got all the battery packs out in my solar farm that are storing 60,000 or 60 gigajoules of power, that's a lot of power, and is in fact, I believe, enough to keep the factory running overnight. However, at the moment, because I haven't set up anything to sort of try and be clever about it, we are still running off the steam turbines overnight and only using the batteries as emergency backup, rather than switching entirely over to the batteries until they start to discharge and then bringing the steam turbines online. So some extra work is going to be required there. I'm going to need to investigate the circuit system in this game, which I haven't actually looked at yet. But then underneath that, we can also see the power consumers. So we've got various assembly line bits and pieces. We've got that radio tower I was talking about. There you go. That's the 10 megawatts. So It is using most of the power that's being used by high voltage machines, and a few other things besides. And then down here you can see each of those transformers I was talking about before. So here you go, we've got one that's running on a very, very small system. We've got one transformer in there, we can do up to 5 megawatts, and that's powering a whole 2 loaders which are using 4 kilowatts, which is almost nothing, but that power was needed somewhere in order to get those loaders to run and to have them work. This one next to it is a similar sort of thing. This is clearly another area where there's some high voltage machines in use, but they need loaders to keep them fed, which are low voltage machines. So we've got a large number of loaders, 22, 19 and 1. So 42 loaders running off a single transformer there, and they're using about 270 kilowatts out of the 5 megawatts. That's absolutely fine. As I pan around, you can see this one is clearly a mining area because we've got some drone miners and some loaders there. This is probably my remote coal mine because we've got a transformer that's feeding a load of mining drills and then a shuttle launch pad and a load of loaders as well. So that makes sense for being a simple self-contained mine. Then on a much larger scale over here, you can see this transformer group, there's 8 small transformers in this one, so we've got a capability of up to 40 megawatts, and we're only actually using 6.7 of that at the moment, it's bizarre that I built it up quite that high, but apparently I have. And then down here, this is my main bus area, so I've got 96 assembler 1s, 82 assembler 2s, and so on and so on. There are many, many machines in there, including about more than 600 loaders of various types, crikey. And so that's all running together nicely off these transformers up here. If you start to run out of power, then you can see this sort of problem here. So somewhere I've got a system where I've got a cargo shuttle start pad there and some casting and distillation. This must be my plastic production area. And sometimes when this bursts and everything starts running at once, we're using more than the 5 megawatts available, and we get this problem where saying there's 5.8 megawatts of capacity required. So at this point, I go, okay, that needs fixing. Let's go over and look at that. And I know that's my plastic production area over here because and unfortunately there isn't an easy way of telling at the moment. Well, that's not quite true. I'll talk about that in a second. But I know from the machines that are in there, we've got a load of distillation columns and chemical plants and a shuttle takeoff pad. So that must be this one down here. This one is being overstressed. So I can say I'd like to put in another one of these transformers in like that, and then I can connect them together with cables like that. And now we've got a potential of 10 megawatts of capacity here. So if I come onto here, so if I click on the grid stats, yep, so that's this one here. You can now see we're using 3.8 megawatts out of 10, and that has gone up to 5.8 megawatts, but that's less than 10, duh. So that's absolutely fine. The problem is, as I said, there's a lot of places where you can't tell what transformer is doing what. However, as of the latest update, you can now rename them, and that's something I need to try and remember to do. So this one is bulk plastic production. So I can rename that like so, and then we'll have, that is now named, so I can check on it later. This one is called Copper Vanity, this one's called Greenery. This is one that I should have renamed. No, this is main factory, I guess, so we'll call that, we'll call it main factory, because why not? So you see, you can go through, and if you can work out which ones they all are, then you can rename them, and then when you see one's having problems, you know which one to go out and upgrade. But unfortunately, when I first started, you weren't able to do that, so I've got rather a lot that are just called Transformer Group, and then a rather large number, and that's not very helpful. Still, you know, early access, it's a thing they've fixed, so, you know, well done to the devs, they've sorted out that problem. This has now turned into a longer video than I was expecting. I didn't think I was going to talk quite so much about terraforming and power generation, but apparently there's a lot to say. So I hope you found it interesting, but I think that means there's going to be a part 3 when I shall go on and talk about large-scale terraforming and copy-paste and the space trading system, all of which are quite meaty topics that I'm going to have a fair amount to say about, so I think that'll easily make another video. So thank you very much for watching. I'll be back next week with another one of these videos to finish off this series, and there'll be some Factorio videos coming out as well, so videos every Thursday and Friday, as you're probably used to by now. I shall also be playing some more Foundry on Wednesday at 8 PM UK time, when I shall carry on with, well, everything that's going on around here and try and expand my factory and make even more stuff and make things work better and better and faster. So that's going quite well at the moment. We'll also be back on Monday 7:30 PM UK time to play some Planetary Pioneers. That's the Factorio mod pack with 5 of us playing and 20 planets, 30 science packs, and so on and so on. Maybe we'll be off on a new planet by then, or maybe we'll just be trying to tidy up what we've built so far. So thank you very much for joining. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any of the future content, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.